So today we're going to go through all of the blue cards in the Lost Caverns of Ixalan to break down the cards I think are going to have the biggest impact in Standard and cards that will be useful for upgrading and building new meta decks and budget decks. And we're going to run through it as quickly as possible and round off at the end with my favourite rare and budget cards that you might want to look out for collecting and possibly even craft. And I'm going to mention any synergies, combos, things to look out for when drafting as well, if you do draft to build up your collection like I do. And yeah, which is really important at the start of a new set. So let's get into the blue cards. Welcome back to the channel. We're breaking down all the blue cards from the Lost Cavern of Ixalan. And yeah, don't forget to like this video and subscribe if you haven't already. So we're going to be looking out for, yeah, like I said, synergies, combos, how good I think each of the cards are. And we're looking out in particular for the two color archetypes that are in this set because they're really great for building budget decks and obviously really good for drafting as well. So the two color archetypes that match with blue, we have Artifact Control with white. We already looked at the white cards yesterday. We've got Descend Control with black, so it cares about putting things into the graveyard. Pirates Aggro with artifacts with red. And Explore Midrange with green, which is kind of a way of ramping. So those are the two color archetypes we're looking out for. Let's get into the first card. So the first one, I'm going to pronounce it wrong. Mikel, First Among Equals. It's a 3-mana 1/5. Very tough creature. Yeah, legendary creature, human. At the beginning of each player's end step, if an artifact entered the battlefield under your control, look at the top two cards of your library, put one of them into your hand and the other into your graveyard. It's a bit like a sleight of hand, like every single turn, as long as an artifact is entered. So obviously, this goes really well with the control deck because you're going to get more value out of this as time goes on. So it goes well with white. Making artifacts every turn is relatively easy with some of the cards in the set. And you can even make treasure tokens or map tokens on the opponent's turn. So you're going to get those extra cards, not just on the end of your turn, at the end of the opponent's turn as well. So that's going to keep your hand completely fueled up with cards, and they're not going to be all lands because you get to look at the top two and pick one over and over again. So it's a really, really good way of just getting that massive amounts of card advantage as long as you're producing artifacts over and over again. So yeah, interesting rare from the set to start us off. We've got Ancestral Reminiscence. It's a 4-mana sorcery to draw 3 cards, then discard a card. So it's a bit like Search for Discovery. So it's a bit like Thirst for Discovery. We've got drawing 3 and discarding 1. With Thirst for Discovery, it has to be a basic land. This can be anything, but Thirst for Discovery is also 1 mana cheaper and is an instant. So this one isn't quite as good, I think. There might be some cases when you'd rather use it, but for me, Thirst for Discovery is better than this one. And we've got Brackish Blunder, a 2-mana instant to return a target creature to its owner's hand. If it was tapped, you create a map token. That's one way of creating a treasure on your opponent's turn if you have Akal Pakal. Yeah, return creature to its owner's hand, 2 mana. It's a bit like a Fading Hope, but it costs 1 more. You don't get the Scry, but you can get a map token out of that. So it's okay. It's probably not as good as a Fading Hope, but with artifact synergies, it's slightly better in that way. We've got Braided Net, which is a 3-mana artifact. When it enters the battlefield, it has 3 net counters on it. And you can tap this to remove a net counter from Braided Net, and you tap another target non-land permanent, and its activated abilities can't be activated for as long as it remains tapped. So you can also craft this with artifact for 2 mana, and it becomes the Braided Quipu, which is an artifact that can pay 4 mana. Tap it to draw a card for each artifact you control, and then you put this back into your library, or the owner's library, third from the top. So you probably want to have at least 2 other artifacts for this to be worth it, because it's an artifact itself, so drawing 3 or 4 cards is probably the rate you want to get the most value out of this. So it works with lots of other artifacts. Drawing lots of cards works well with the white artifact control deck as well. So it's great being able to tap a non-land permanent, and its activated abilities can't be activated for as long as it's tapped. If you tap something like an opponent's Planeswalker, which I believe is possible, and I believe this works, but let me know in the comments if you think I'm wrong about that. I'll have to test it out one day. If you tap that at the beginning of your opponent's turn, a Planeswalker will be tapped and unable to use its abilities that turn. So, interesting way you can kind of shut down Planeswalkers as well with that. Okay, we've got Chart a Course. It's a 2-mana sorcery, draw 2 cards, then discard a card unless you attacked this turn. So good if you have flying or evasive creatures or creatures that can't be blocked, or you don't mind attacking, depending on what's going on the battlefield, because you don't want to discard a card. So drawing 2 cards for 2 mana is just a really good rate, as long as you can attack. So kind of need to be able to attack to get that value out of it. But at the very least, drawing 2 cards and then discarding one of them is kind of like sleight of hand. It's kind of like scrying one, having a look at which one you prefer to have. So it's better than just drawing one card. Not terrible, even if you don't attack. We've got the Cogwork Wrestler, a 1-mana artifact gnome. It's a 1/2 creature. It has flash, and when it enters the battlefield, target creature an opponent controls get -2, -0 until end of turn. So its power goes down by 2. It's kind of like, yeah, it could block something by surprise. It could, but it's not likely to kill it with just 1 power. But it's another artifact coming down on the opponent's turn, potentially, because it has flash. That works with the other artifact synergies coming down on the opponent's turn. But also you could use this aggressively. You want to take down an opponent's strongest creature, so they can't block as effectively. So it's okay, to be honest. A 1-mana 1/2 creature with flash by itself isn't that bad, and the artifact creature being relevant is decent. So the extra -2 is a little bonus that if you don't make use of that, it's still good anyway. So it's a decent little creature for the right deck. So we have Confounding Riddle is a 3-mana instant where we can choose to either look at the top 4 cards of our library, put one of them into our hand and the rest into our graveyard, or we can counter a spell unless its controller pays 4. Now this one I really like for the mono blue Jin style of deck, because it's nice to have the counter spell when you need it and making the opponent pay 4. The majority of the time is pretty much a hard counter spell, because paying 4, if it's a decent thing you're trying to counter, they probably won't have 4 mana left unless the game's gone on really long. But also, it also means if they don't have something you want to counter, or you have other counter spells in your hand, then you can just use this as a kind of like an impulse. You're looking at the top 4 and picking one that has the added bonus that the other 3 go into your graveyard. So you could potentially be getting 3 instants or sorceries into the graveyard, which is really good when you're trying to cast your Tolarian Terrors and your Haughty Djinns. So I quite like this one for the mono blue deck. I think it could find a place in there, replacing some of the counter spells maybe. So we've got Council of Echoes is a 6-mana 4/4 creature. So the stats are a bit low. It is flying, which isn't bad. It also has Descend 4. So when Council of Echoes enters the battlefield, if there are 4 or more permanent cards in your graveyard, you get to return up to one target non-land permanent to other than itself to its owner's hand. So the stats itself are kind of low, but for flying it's not terrible. It works well with the black and blue style of deck because it's descend control. Care about the number of permanents you have in your graveyard. As long as you have at least 4, you can return another non-land permanent to its owner's hand. It could be one of yours, could be one of theirs. There's kind of a built-in extra fading hope on top of the creature. Not terrible, but kind of expensive. Not amazing. It's okay. It's okay. So we've got Deeproot Pilgrimage, a 2-mana enchantment. This is a rare. Whenever one or more non-token merfolk you control become tapped, you get to create a 1/1 blue merfolk creature token with hexproof. It's been a while since merfolk have been very relevant in standard. I haven't seen them very much since I've been on Arena in the past 3 years or so. So it's interesting to be able to get this, which has very strong synergies for the creature type. Obviously, depends how much you can tap a non-token merfolk and which merfolk we have. So we'll have to look out for those. If we can do them, we can create lots and lots of extra 1/1 tokens with hexproof, which is pretty good. And this only happens whenever If you have more than one that taps at the same time, like if you attack with 3 non-token merfolk, then that's one instance of one or more becoming tapped, so you'd make one creature. But if you had a merfolk that could somehow tap to activate an ability, and then another one that attacked, they would each trigger the extra 1/1 creature. So you could get more that way depending on how you're activating abilities, when you tap them, maybe the opponent taps one of your creatures on their turn with an ability they have, and you make an extra merfolk. So it's interesting having so many tokens with hexproof potentially out there. There's lots of things you could do with them, like make it unblockable, make it draw cards when it hits the opponent. There's lots of things we could do. So that's an interesting thing to try out. We've got Didact Echo, a 5-mana creature. It's a 3/2, a spirit cleric. When it enters the battlefield, you get to draw a card. 5 mana, 3/2, draws a card. It's okay. It also has Descend 4. It has flying as long as there are 4 or more permanent cards in your graveyard. So 5 mana for a 3/2 flyer that also draws a card is, yeah, it's okay for a rate. It's not amazing. It needs Descend 4 for it to be really any good, because 5 mana 3/2 that draws a card is a little bit not very impressive. But yeah, having the flying makes it at least a bit better. Okay, we've got Eaten by Piranhas, a 2-mana enchantment aura with flash, and the enchanted creature loses all abilities and is a black skeleton creature with base power and toughness 1/1. This is a bit like the legitimate business person. You turn anything into a 1/1 creature with no other abilities. It's a 2-mana, it's flash, pretty good. Yeah, I could see that being used in decks against like big creatures, taken down to a 1/1. It's almost as good as killing the creature, but leaving them with a 1/1. You could block it, you could kill it, it goes to the graveyard. Yeah, I like it's a good way of getting rid of a creature. And yeah, as long as the creature's not hexproof, you can do it to anything, so it's pretty good. We have Frilled Caveworm, a 4-mana 2/5 creature with Descend 4 again. When it enters, it gets +2/+0 for as long as there are 4 or more permanent cards in your graveyard. So a 4-mana 2/5, not that exciting. A 4-mana 4/5 is pretty good for blue, where creatures tend to be a little bit underpowered. So again, caring about Descent, having enough things in your graveyard, being able to put things in your graveyard, like with that the Confounding Riddle. With that, we can put 3 things into our graveyard straight away. They could be lands, they could be enchantments, they could be creatures, so they could be permanents. They could also just be instants and sorceries, but being able to get things into our graveyard is something that blue cares about in this set. Okay, then we've got Hermitic Nautilus, a 2-mana 1/4 creature. It's an artifact. It has vigilance, and you can pay 2 mana to give it +3/-3 till end of turn. So it can turn from a 1/4 into a 4/1, which makes it decent to attack with, and it has vigilance, so it's decent to block with. So actually, this is quite a nice creature. For blue, I like to have the versatility of being able to turn it into a 1/4 into a 4/1. Obviously, it costs mana, but it's basically like a built-in combat trick. So it's, yeah, I quite like that one. Little artifact creature. So we have Hurl into History, a 5-mana instant, and you get to counter an artifact or creature spell. So it has to be one of those types. And you can discover X, where X is that spell's mana value. So it could be anything from 1 up to 7, 8. It could be something really big. So you get to exile cards from the top of your library until you find a non-land with that mana value or less. So even if you counter something that costs 7 to cast, you might find something that's 1 or 2 from the top of your deck, because it's just basically luck. And you can cast that without paying its mana cost. Or you can put it into your hand if you don't want to cast it immediately. It's something like that Flash Aura that takes out a creature. If there's nothing else to take out, you might want to put it into your hand so you can use it later on, and the rest go on the bottom of your library in a random order. So Discover is a bit of a gamble. It could be something really big, it could be something really small. 5 mana for a counter spell is quite a lot. Having that built-in free card that basically you get to play or draw, even if it's just counter a spell and draw a card, or potentially play a card without paying its mana cost, I think it's pretty good, although it's a random card, so it depends what you have in your deck. So it's a bit like rolling the dice there, but interesting, just kind of expensive. And then we've got Inverted Iceberg, a 2-mana artifact. When it enters the battlefield, you mill a card, then you draw a card. So this is helping with Descend, milling an extra card, put it into the graveyard, and drawing one. So it's nice to have, it's a permanent, 2 mana, it mills and it draws. It's quite a lot of value in one thing. And then you can also craft it with another artifact, and that only costs 6 mana. And when you craft it, it becomes the Iceberg Titan, which is a 6/6 creature. Whenever it attacks, you may tap or untap target artifact or creature. So this is really, really good. You can tap your opponent's best blocker. You can untap an artifact you need to then tap it again, do something else. You can basically do all kinds of things with that. And also, unless I'm wrong here, it will attack. It taps itself, and you may untap it because it is an artifact or creature. So you can basically give it vigilance if there's nothing else you need to tap with. It. So that's a 6/6 for 6 mana, which kind of has vigilance or an unblock ability to it, being able to tap the opponent's blockers. So I really like Inverted Iceberg. It does quite a lot. Really good in the early game, just to draw an extra card to get Descend going by milling a card, and it's an artifact on the battlefield if that matters. An artifact entering under your control that turn. It's an extra artifact for things that care about the number of artifacts you have. So yeah, pretty fun card there. Really good creature when it transforms. Okay, then we've got Kitesail Larcenist, a 3-mana 2/3 flyer with Ward 1. This is a pirate, so it's going to fit with the blue and red deck. And when it enters the battlefield, for each player, you choose up to one other target artifact or creature they control. And for as long as Kitesail Larcenist remains on the battlefield, those permanents become treasure artifacts that you can tap them and sacrifice them just like any other normal treasure, and they lose all other abilities. So no wonder this is a rare, because it's a 3-mana 2/3 flyer with Ward 1, which is good to start with. But you get to choose artifacts or creatures that basically become treasure, but only for as long as it remains on the battlefield. So if they do kill it, it comes back as, the creature or artifact it was to start with. But it's a pretty good way of removing your opponent's biggest things. And so it's a pretty cool creature there. You can also, I guess, if you want to, because it's for each player, it doesn't say each opponent. You could even take something of your own and turn that into a treasure token. So if you wanted to turn a 1/1 or a creature that isn't any good into treasure to kind of ramp as well, there's that potential there. So Kitesail Larcenist is a interesting card to build around with. And I quite like that one. Okay, on to the next page. Okay, so now we've got Lodestone Needle, a 2-mana artifact with flash. When it enters the battlefield, you tap up to one target artifact or creature and put 2 stun counters on it. So it's out of the battlefield effectively for 2 turns, or tapped for 2 turns. So 2-mana flash, take something out for a while. That's pretty good. That's okay. And then you can craft with another artifact, 3 mana, and it becomes the Guidestone Compass, an artifact where you can pay 1 and tap it. Target creature you control explores. So exploring obviously works well with the blue and green deck. Also, it is very control-y, so it works well with the blue and white deck as well, probably. Get to explore. That's effectively drawing a card if it's a land, or putting a +1/+1 counter on the creature that you target. And you can put potentially another creature into the graveyard, which helps with Descent. So actually, it kind of helps with that as well. That works with all kinds of decks, actually. It's quite nice to have one that's so versatile. So taking out an opponent's creature, putting 2 stun counters on it, more relevant if you're going to be doing something that turn that you couldn't do if that creature wasn't tapped, or at least you're stopping it from attacking you. You're going to stay alive a bit longer. So yeah, pretty good card, the Lodestone Needle. I like that one. We've got Malcolm, Alluring Scoundrel. It's a 2-mana, 2/1 flash flyer, the Siren Pirate, so it goes with the red deck. And whenever Malcolm enters the battlefield, whenever Malcolm deals combat damage to a player, you put a chorus counter on it. You draw a card, then discard a card, and if there are 4 or more chorus counters on Malcolm, you may cast the discarded card without paying its mana cost. So again, depends on what you get. Could be getting anything at all. If you're able to scry and put a certain card on top of your library, you know you're going to draw that card, then that's good. But also, it could just be any card that's in your hand, because you draw a card, then you choose any card to discard, and then you can just play that card for free. So it could be anything. It's a good way of getting out a big spell for free. Also, just being a 2/1 flyer with flash for 2 mana. It's a bit like the Mastermind Fairy, kind of, but a bit more aggressive because you want to attack with it, do that combat damage, get those chorus counters. You can also do things like proliferate to add extra counters onto it once you get the first chorus counter. You don't necessarily have to hit with it so many times. If you gave it something like double strike, then it would deal combat damage more than once. So you would get 2 chorus counters on it if it hit the opponent twice with double strike. There are things you can do to help get there faster, but just by itself, it's a decent creature. So I think it's pretty good. It's a shame it's only 1 toughness, but it's hard to block because it's flying, so there's got to be some downside to it. Okay, we've got Marauding Brinefang, a 7 mana 6/7 dinosaur with Ward 3, and it also has island cycling, so you can pay 2 mana to discard it and find an island card from your library, put it into your hand and shuffle again. So 7 mana 6/7 with Ward 3. It's a pretty tough thing to get rid of, pretty tough thing to kill. But yeah, it's kind of expensive. 7 mana for a 6/7 that doesn't have any other abilities. But it's nice. It has island cycling, so if you're drafting with this, or even if you're using it in constructed at any point, you can use it just to search up a land if you have it in your hand early on in the game and you don't want it. Also, island cycling and this land cycling is really good for descend, because you're basically putting a creature into the graveyard and getting a land into your hand as well. So it's filling that graveyard with permanents. So it's okay as a creature, but might not see that much play. We've got Merfolk Cave Diver, a 3 mana 2/4 creature. Whenever a creature you control explores, Merfolk Cave Diver gets +1/+0 to end of turn and can't be blocked this turn. So this is a good Merfolk that you could attack with and would tap itself, and you get the ability from the other Merfolk, the other enchantment will create the extra 1/1 hexproof Merfolks as well. So yeah, works well with that. Obviously, it's exploring as well. Exploring works well with green. So it becomes a 3/4. It can't be blocked. If you can buff it up as well, when it can't be blocked, you get quite a lot of damage through. Over 3 mana, that's pretty good for an uncommon. We've got Open Siren, a 2 mana 1/2 artifact creature. It's another pirate. It has flying and vigilance, and you can tap it to add blue, but you can only spend that mana to cast an artifact spell or activate abilities of an artifact source. So you need to have lots of artifacts to cast to be able to use that as ramp. But even if you can't, a 2 mana 1/2 flying vigilance creature is a good one just to keep getting damage through slowly, a bit at a time. Maybe you can boost it up with some other auras or combat tricks. So yeah, also can block pretty well. And so yeah, it's nice if you've got the right artifact spells to ramp into. Okay, then we've got Oja Akpatik, Deepest Epoch. It's a 4 mana 4/3 legendary creature. It's a god. It's a mythic rare, and it has flying. Whenever you cast an instant spell from your hand, it gains a rebound. Now, rebound's an interesting thing. It exiles the card as it resolves, the spell as it resolves, and at the beginning of your next upkeep, you may cast it from exile without paying its mana cost. So you basically get it twice. You play it once, it resolves, but it also effectively copies itself into an exile zone, and you can cast it again for free. So if it's a big spell, getting a lot of value by casting it more than once. But also, when this creature dies, you return it to the battlefield tapped and transformed, and it has 3 time counters on it. So it becomes a Temple of Cyclical Time, land that can just tap for blue, and you also remove a time counter from it when you tap it for blue. So 3 turns, and those 3 time counters are gone, and you can pay 3 and tap it to transform it back into its original form, and only if it has no time counters on it, and only as a sorcery. So 3 more turns as a land, and you can turn it back into the creature and get all that benefit of casting instants from your hand and getting a rebound. It's interesting that it's not sorceries as well, only instants, but obviously a really good creature. It's a mythic rare, but you see it, I would get it. What deck would it work well in? I don't know if it would necessarily go in like a kind of mono blue Jin kind of control deck, but there probably are quite a few other decks that you might want to cast instants repeatedly. So yeah, we'll look out for some decks to put that in. So we've got Orax Puzzle Door. Things are so hard to say. It's a 1-mana artifact where you can pay 1, tap it, and you can sacrifice the puzzle door to look at the top 2 cards of your library, put one into your hand and the other into your graveyard. So it's not hugely exciting. It's a bit like sleight of hand. You're looking at 2. It's a bit like kind of like consider. You're effectively kind of scrying or like not scrying, surveilling one away, kind of. So it's 2 mana to do that. It's nice that you don't have to do it immediately, so you could play it down whenever you have a spare mana, and then you can sacrifice it when it becomes relevant to sacrifice it. But yeah, it's okay. Nothing too exciting. But it's another artifact entering the battlefield, so that might make a difference in a deck. So we've got Out of Air, a 4-mana instant, costs 2 less if it targets a creature spell, and you can counter the spell. So 2 mana hard counter spell for any creatures, or a 4-mana hard counter spell for any non-creatures. So that's pretty good. Obviously, much better when you're against creature decks. Having a 2-mana hard counter is really good. I don't know if I'd necessarily use that over something that is like, pay 4, or whether you'd want to have a kind of 3-mana counter spell that could counter different things. So yeah, it could be expensive, it could be cheaper. Not sure if I like the gamble of not knowing what they're going to cast, and then if you keep 2 mana up, you have to hope they cast a creature spell, not a non-creature. So it's okay. I don't know if I would use it, to be honest. We've got Pirate Hat as a 2-mana artifact. It's an equipment that gives a creature +1/+1, and whenever it attacks, you draw a card and discard a card. Only costs 1 to equip to a pirate. It's only 2 to equip to anything else. So it's great if you have those flying pirates that can attack each turn, have vigilance, give them +1/+1. They get to draw a card, discard a card, filling up the graveyard if that matters, or you're just drawing cards and picking the best things, keeping the best things. So Pirate Hat is relatively cheap to be able to do that. It's I could see using that in a deck that has a good number of flying creatures. Maybe even if they're not pirates, the pirate only gives an extra like 1 mana discount to equip it. So pretty good way of drawing extra cards and filtering through your deck. All right, we've got Relic's Roar, a 1-mana instant. Until end of turn, target artifact or creature becomes a dinosaur artifact creature with base power 3 in addition to its other types. So what's interesting about that is you could target non-creature artifacts and they become a creature. So you could be any of these other things that go down and sit at the side. You could use Pirate Hat, could become a creature. But even things like the Puzzle Door, 1-mana artifact sits at the side. You could turn that into a dinosaur if you really wanted to, with base power 4/3. So it's a really good combat trick, considering it's only 1 mana. And obviously it could be something the opponent has that's much stronger. It comes down to a 4/3 if you ever need to do that. But I like the idea of turning any creature into a 4/3 out of nowhere. Another thing that works well with this that isn't in this isn't from this set, but incubate tokens are really good because they are artifacts. They have +1 counters on them, but they're technically 0/0s. If you have a incubator token that's has 3 +1 counters on it, use this 1-mana spell, and it becomes if it has 3 +1 counters on it, it becomes a 7/6 for the turn without having to pay the 2 to activate it and turn it into a creature permanently. So yeah, interesting that you can do that with all kinds of artifacts. So Relic's Roar looks like a decent enough combat trick in the right deck. So we've got River Herald Scout, a 2-mana 1/2 Merfolk Scout creature. When it enters the battlefield, it explores, and that's all it does. 1/2 for 2 mana that gets to explore. It could become a 2/3, potentially. You can put something in the graveyard. It can draw you an extra land. It's okay. I could see using that. It's not the most exciting thing, but it's okay to fill out a deck in limited, but not really in standard. So Sage of Days is a 3-mana, 3/2 creature human wizard. When it enters the battlefield, look at the top 3 cards of your library, put one of those cards back on top of your library, and the rest into your graveyard. So you're not getting card advantage. You're not drawing any extra cards. You are kind of getting to surveil for 3, potentially, putting 2 things into your graveyard that might be relevant for Descend, and knowing what you're going to draw next, which can matter when you have things like Delver of Secrets wants to know the next one to draw is an instant or sorcery. When you're exploring, depends on whether you have a land or a non-land on top. You could potentially fix that and then cast something that explores. So you are then drawing a card or putting a creature into the graveyard and getting a +1/+1 counter. If you need to do that, you can basically set that up. So it's okay. It's nothing incredible again, but it's nice little trick. So we've got Self-Reflection as a 6-mana sorcery. Create a token that's a copy of target creature you control, and you can flash this back as well for 4 mana to cast it from your graveyard again. But it's 6 mana to cast it the first time. So what's interesting about that is you might be able to put that into your graveyard to mill it to make it effectively cheaper. Then you're losing 1 use of it. So it's funny how you have to pay more the first time you use it and it's better the second time. But yeah, being able to make a token that's a copy of any creature you control, especially if you have some really big creatures like, that 6/6 that basically has vigilance, or a big flying creature. It doesn't say it has to be non-legendary, but if it is a legendary creature you're copying, you'll have to keep one and sacrifice the other one. If you sacrifice one that can then transform into the land, you kind of have the creature and the land for both sides of that happening at the same time. So there's things you could do with that potentially. But yeah, so interesting to be able to copy basically anything. 6 mana does feel a bit expensive, so you better be copying something really good if you're paying 6 mana for it. But also being able to copy it again with the flashback is a nice added bonus. It'll be interesting to see what creatures we can copy with Self-Reflection. We've got Shipwreck Sentry is a 2-mana 3/3 human pirate, which sounds really good. It is Defender, so it can't normally attack, but as long as you have, as an artifact enters the battlefield under your control this turn, then it can attack as though it doesn't have Defender. So a 2-mana 3/3 every turn that can attack as long as artifacts entered. You might have artifact creatures entering, you might have map tokens and things, so and treasure tokens. So Shipwreck Sentry could potentially be a decent attacker on the majority of turns. I don't tend to like these defenders that sometimes aren't just defenders, but it seems okay. Like I said, in the right deck, something where artifacts enter a lot, this could be really good for an aggro deck. So we've got Sinuous Benthesaur as a 6-mana 4/4 dinosaur. When it enters the battlefield, you can look at the top X cards of your library, where X is a number of caves you control, plus the number of cave cards in your graveyard. Put 2 of those cards into your hand, and the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. So we're looking at the top X, where it's the number of caves you control. So if you only control 1 cave, you will only look at the top 1 card on top of your deck. So you can only get 1 of those, I guess, into your hand. So you want to have at least 2 caves to get the bare minimum ideal value out of this, and drawing 2 cards effectively. So 6 mana 4/4 that can draw 2 cards is good. And if you have more caves, you can look at more cards. Probably won't be used that much in draft because you're unlikely to have lots of caves unless they're really common, and I don't think they're that common. So potentially in standard, but even then, a 6-mana 4/4 creature does feel pretty expensive, even if it draws a little bit. So I don't think it'll see that much play, but it's an uncommon. So we'll see if people think that's valuable. Let me know what you think. We've got Song of Stupefaction is a 2-mana enchantment aura to enchant a creature or vehicle. When it enters, you may mill 2 cards, which might be relevant. And it also, when it enchants the permanent, it gives that -X -0, where X is a number of permanent cards in your graveyard. So you can stop someone from attacking with a decent creature, but it still leaves it there. It can still block things. If it's got high toughness, it's still hard to kill. So getting to mill 2 cards is one thing. I don't know if that's enough value to make up for the fact that it still leaves a creature on the battlefield that might be a decent blocker. And if you don't have that many permanents in your graveyard, they can somehow remove permanents from your graveyard, then the -X part isn't going to do much either. I'm not too impressed with Song of Stupefaction. Next we have Spyglass Siren. It's a 1 mana, 1/1 flyer, Siren Pirate, and when it enters the battlefield, you create a map token. So it's nice that we get to get that 1/1 flyer. We can attack every turn, attach a pirate hat to it, and it gets to draw lots of things and help fix your hand. So yeah, it's okay. It's uncommon for a 1/1, but that flying is definitely very valuable. And we'll see how useful the map tokens are when we start to get to play with them. But I think that extra artifact entering is going to be kind of useful. So we've got Staunch Crewmate, a 2 mana, 2/1, another human pirate. When it enters the battlefield, you look at the top 4 cards of your library, reveal an artifact or pirate from among them, put it into your hand, put the rest on the bottom of your library. So 2 mana, 2/1 that takes a card from the top 4, effectively drawing a card with some selection. It has to be an artifact or pirate, so it could technically whiff. It could get just all land or whatever, anything that isn't an artifact or a pirate. So if you're building this deck, you want to make sure you have almost entirely artifacts or pirates, apart from your lands. So you're going to not miss out on the ability because a 2 mana 2/1 by itself isn't particularly exciting. So yeah, could get anything from the library into your hand as well. So that's pretty nice. We've got Subterranean Schooner, a 2 mana 3/4 vehicle. Haven't got many vehicles in the set so far, maybe a couple. Whenever Subterranean Schooner attacks, target creature that crewed it this turn explores. It's only crew 1, which is nice for a 3/4 creature or vehicle, allowing that creature that tapped to crew it to explore and potentially draw a land or put a +1 counter on it, potentially put something in the graveyard. There's a lot of different things you can do, and considering it's only 2 mana, I think it's not a bad rate for that. It's a rare, which makes sense. So I think it's okay, it could work in certain decks. We have the Enigma Jewel next, which is a 1 mana legendary artifact. This is a mythic rare, and when it enters the battlefield, it's tapped. You can, on your next turn, when it untaps, tap it for 2 colorless mana and spend it only to activate abilities. So this is only good in a deck where you have activated abilities, otherwise it doesn't do anything there. And you can craft it with 4 or more non-land permanents with activated abilities. That's a lot to think about. The rest of the crafting so far have just been crafted with an artifact. This has to be 4 or more, and they have to be on land. Doesn't mean they don't have to be artifacts, but they have to have activated abilities. They cost 9 mana for this. 9 mana is quite a lot. And it becomes the Locus of Enlightenment, a legendary artifact that has each activated ability of the exiled cards you use to craft it. And that kind of seems like an Agatha's Soul Cauldron, where you could get something to tap and untap for mana. But it does also say here you may activate each of those abilities only once each turn. So you can't do it as an infinite loop. And whenever you activate an ability that isn't a mana ability, you get to copy it and choose new targets for the copy. So if you have a deck with lots of activated abilities, then the Enigma Jewel is surprisingly a very cheap legendary artifact to get down. Only costs 1. You can tap it for 2 mana, and you can use those 2 mana to craft. So this works well in a deck where you want to craft lots of things, because crafting is an activated ability. And so yeah, it can basically pay 2 for itself, which makes sense why it costs 9, because it actually only costs 7 because it can give itself the extra 2 as well. But being able to spend those 2 on different things, on crafting different cards and making them better, makes it interesting for that kind of deck. Whether that kind of deck will have enough tools in it to be very competitive, we will find out eventually. But yeah, interesting that we can basically get lots of activated abilities on a card. Since Agatha's Soul Cauldron came out, I'm always looking at activated abilities and wondering how they work with other ones. So we'll find out if there's some cool combos we can do with Enigma Jewel, even if it's only once per turn. Okay, right, on to the next page. We then have the Ever Flowing Well. a 3-mana legendary artifact again. This is a rare. When it enters the battlefield, you mill 2 cards, then draw 2 cards. So not bad for 3 mana, that's okay to start with. It also has Descend 8. At the beginning of your upkeep, if there are 8 or more permanent cards in your graveyard, you get to transform Ever-Flowing Well, and it becomes the Myriad Pools, a legendary artifact land that can tap for blue mana, but also whenever you cast a permanent spell using mana produced by the Myriad Pools, up to one other target permanent you control becomes a copy of that spell until end of turn. So there might be lots of things you might want to copy and have 2 of those. Take any other permanents you control to become a copy of that spell. So it doesn't say non-land permanent again, so this could be a land that turns into a creature or something else that you're casting. So we'll have to see what things we can put together with that to basically make extra copies of things. But the Ever-Flowing Well is pretty good considering you get to mill 2, draw 2 as well. It needs to send 8, which is a higher bar to reach, having 8 permanents in your graveyard. So we'll see how easy it is to get that. I don't think it'll be that easy in draft. So you probably won't use this in draft, but in standard, I can see some people playing around with this card. Okay, we've got Tishana's Tidebender next. A 3-mana, 3/2 creature. It's a merfolk wizard. It has flash. And when it enters the battlefield, you counter up to 1 target activated or triggered ability. So that could be anything from, a shield red causing 2 life loss from drawing a card, or it could be the opponent is trying to craft something, so you get to counter that activated ability. And it says if an ability of an artifact, creature, or planeswalker is countered this way, that permanent loses all abilities for as long as Shana's Tidebender remains on the battlefield. So again, another way to shut down planeswalkers. You can have any planeswalker activating any ability, and you play out Tidebender, you counter that ability, it doesn't happen, and it loses all abilities while it's on the battlefield. That's a lot. That's a lot you can do to a planeswalker. It's basically pacifying a planeswalker. I mean, they can't act at all. So, and a 3-mana 3/2 with flash is okay to start with. So, I think that's an interesting card. I would definitely like to play around with that. Probably more in standard because we're going to find other cards that craft into really cool things, and planeswalkers and things like that in standard much more than you're going to find that in draft. So, interesting card. We have Unlucky Drop, a 4-mana instant. Target artifact or creature's owner puts it at the top or bottom of their library. So it seems kind of expensive, 4 mana to pretty much just remove something from the board and put it back on the library, so they have to draw it again, so it slows them down by 1 card draw. It's okay. The Hornlock Whale at the moment can spend 2 mana to do this to an attacking creature, which is probably the majority of times you want to use it when you're being attacked by something else. So Unlucky Drop is a bit like a slightly worse version of that, by the looks of it. Okay, we've got Waterlogged Hulk next. Is a 1-mana artifact. Seems to be lots of cheap artifacts in blue, where you can tap it to mill a card, which is okay. We can craft it with an island. So most other things have said craft with artifacts, but this you can exile this and exile an island you control, or an island card from your graveyard, and you get to return it. This costs 4 mana. You can technically tap an island to make the mana to cast the craft, do the craft, and then it could take the tapped island as the cost for the spell. That's fun. And then you transform it into Watertight Gondola. It's a vehicle with vigilance, a 4/4 with crew 1, which is really good. It also has Descend 8. It can't be blocked as long as there are 8 or more permanent cards in your graveyard. So having a 4/4 unblockable creature is going to finish off the game in a few turns. So as long as you have 8 or more permanents in your graveyard, then that's going to do its thing. So yeah, interesting card, the Waterlogged Hulk. Nice to be able to mill cards and enable that Descend later on. Okay, we've got Waterwind Scout next, a 3-mana 2/2 Merfolk Scout with flying, so the stats are a little bit lower. When it enters the battlefield, you create a map token, which is okay. 2/2 flyer for 3 is okay. Making the map tokens a little bit extra. Not hugely exciting, but could be a good extra card to add. Then we've got Waylaying Pirates, a 4-mana 3/3 human pirate creature. When it enters the battlefield, if you control an artifact, you tap target artifact or creature an opponent controls and put a stun counter on it. You want to make sure you have artifacts out already, which doesn't seem that difficult with pirates. And you can, tap the opponent's creature or an artifact and put a stun counter on it so they can't immediately untap. So yeah, interesting one to add to the deck. So to the set, it's a 4-mana 3/3, which is okay. Nice to have that extra ability. And then we've got the last blue card of the set here is Zoetic Glyph. It's a 3-mana enchantment aura. When it enchants a creature, it has to enchant an artifact, and when it enchants the artifact, it is a golem creature with base power and toughness 5/4 in addition to its other types. When it's put into a graveyard from the battlefield, you get to discover 3, which is kind of like Cascade, passing one of those things for free, the first thing that comes up. So yeah, that's an interesting one for blue. And obviously one that you might want to use on your own creature rather than your opponent's, because you might have a 1/1 or a 0/1. You can turn it into a 5/4 as long as Zoetic Glyph is still on the battlefield, or you can take down an opponent's really big creature if you have to and make it just that bit smaller. And now I'm going to go over my favourite uncommons and rares from the set so far. With blue, the Confounding Riddle I think is one that's really useful, just having that ability to use one or the other modes on the card, and it being a 3-mana counterspell pretty much for anything, because paying 4 is a big cost. I think it's a really good card that we're going to see stick around in Standard for a while. And another one that I think is really interesting is the Inverted Iceberg. Being able to mill a card, draw a card, and then craft for 6 mana, become this 6/6 creature that kind of has vigilance, is just a really big creature to get for a common. So in draft, I can see that working out. If it works out so much in Standard, I don't know. We'll see. Well, if you make the crafting cost less with something like Training Grounds, maybe we'll see that come into Standard as well, making a pretty big creature. And then for the rares and mythics that I like from this particular colour, we've got Akal, which is basically card advantage on every one of your turns and potentially the opponent's turn as well. As long as an artifact entered, and there's lots of different little artifacts that we've seen you can put into the battlefield. Some have flash to get them on the opponent's turn as well. So yeah, Akal really good as a blocker because it has 5 toughness. It's going to make the game last longer, which you want in a control deck, and it's going to give you loads of card advantage. So it does all kinds of things. It's only 3 mana, so I think that's pretty good. I also think Deeproot Pilgrimage is one to watch, possibly only for the draft decks. I don't know if there's going to be many Merfolk in Standard that will work together to make the kind of Merfolk, creature type deck as good as it could be. We'll have to see how that works out, and we want to see enough decent common and uncommon Merfolk. We don't want them all to be rare because I don't think it's going to be the best meta deck, but as an uncommon, as a budget deck, I think it could work pretty well with this, so we'll see how that pans out. And there's lots of other rares and mythics I could mention that I think are kind of cool. I quite like Oja Patic Deepest Epoch. It's a 4-mana 4/3 flyer, and you get to basically cast instants more than once. So it depends what instant you have, but it could be anything from drawing 3 cards, or if you're splashing other colors, if it's not just mono blue, you could have any removal spell. You could have something like Breach the Multiverse isn't instant, is it? But you can cast, it depends what big instance you have. But yeah, pretty cool that you can basically cast them a second time for free. So we'll see what other instants come out that are really useful for this. I think there's going to be a lot of things. Considering it's a 4/3 flying creature, it might even find its way into an Esper control-y mid-range deck as well. We'll see what happens with that. And then the last special mention for rares is Tishana's Tidebender, the 3-mana 3/2 flash Merfolk wizard. I'm getting a feeling Merfolk is going to be an expensive deck because it's rare. When it enters, counter an activated or triggered ability, and so you can basically stop anything, which is nice. But also being able to make the creature or permanent, could be a planeswalker, lose abilities for as long as it's on the battlefield. Being able to shut down potentially a Planeswalker permanently with this, or anything else that might have an activated ability that you don't want your opponent to do. And it's pretty cool that it can stop effectively anything. And there's so many different activated or triggered abilities that this is an interesting thing to have. And also, I'm trying to think how this will work with Agatha's Soul Cauldron, because if the permanent loses all abilities, then I'm guessing it couldn't use anything, even if it has a +1 counter, and you have Agatha's Soul Cauldron with different abilities stacked underneath it. So I'm pretty sure that's how that would work out. So you could stop infinite combos and things that opponents have as well by just stopping their creature having those having the ability. So yeah, we'll see how that works out in standard or in draft. I guess this one's probably more of a standard kind of card. But it all looks really interesting. So let me know what you think in the comments. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And don't forget you can also join the Game School Dad Discord community through Patreon, where we have bonus content, including a draft success tracker, master value spreadsheet, and cards worth crafting in standard for every set up to this one. And this one's going to be added as well. So we also have a giveaway in December. It's for a $25 digital gift card. You give your account a boost of cards or other products from mtgacodes.com. So have a look at the Patreon link in the description if you want to check that out and maybe join up and potentially get that giveaway on top of the bonus content. So yeah, thanks for watching this video to the end, and I'll see you in the next one.